started in the mining industry as a young woman, I quickly found myself a mentor. Now I say quickly because it really was just that. There were just not that many women for me to choose from, particularly women in technical roles. Now, this role model I was able to find was the first woman her first company had ever hired in a frontline role. And her career got off to a pretty interesting start. You see, her supervisor was concerned that they wouldn't be able to source any high visibility skirts for her to wear on the job in her role as a mechanical engineer. I guess her supervisor had clearly forgotten that at this point in time, women had been wearing pants for decades. Now, this woman was hugely influential to me. She was capable, she was driven, and she was a terrific manager. And I have no doubt that it was these kinds of experiences that shaped her, for better or worse, into the leader she became. As is often the case, the women you meet on a mine site are smart, they're ambitious, and they're humble. They have to be. You just don't survive a career in mining as a woman without being those things. Okay, so granted this incident was 30 years ago, and I'm very pleased to report that no longer are women expected to wear skirts on a mine site, so we have made some progress. But have we really made that much? When I started in mining 7 years ago, the work uniform I had to choose from was all unisex. Now, unisex is fine, it's adequate, it kind of does the job, but rarely is it appropriate for all genders. So by default, unisex is male. And so I spent 4 years wearing pants that just didn't fit. What's more, the boots I wore were less durable than my male colleagues. I would see my boots wear out at a much faster pace than theirs, but I guess everyone assumed that I wouldn't be getting them dirty. These boots that I'm wearing here were the only option I had to choose from, but my male colleagues had an option of 4. And okay, I did not have to consider wearing a skirt in my workplace. That probably wouldn't have worked out very well. So clearly we have made some progress. But have we made enough? We've been talking about gender equality for decades and we are still here. And in fact, none of what I'm going to tell you today is new. You've all heard it before. So what are we going to do to turn this around? We know increased participation of women in workplaces and society is good. So why are we not there yet? What small steps do we need to take now for us to get back on track? Well, to paint a picture, I'd like to tell you about where we're at in the mining industry today. Well, you'll not be surprised to hear that the mining industry is still one of the worst for gender equality, diversity and inclusion globally. Women continue to be underrepresented. And in fact, of the global workforce, only 16% are women. And it's a vicious cycle. Women enter the industry because of the great pay, but they end up leaving because of lack of advancement opportunities. The drop-off from female entry-level mining role to CEO is huge, and in fact is the most pronounced across all industries globally. And I mean, it makes sense, right? If you start your career and you look at all the levels above you and see no one that looks like you, how can you possibly think you're going to succeed there? And sure, we're slowly getting women, but it's not at all levels where it matters. We have a clear lack of development pathways for women and a clear lack of access to female role models and mentors. This in turn leads to a lack of women in leadership positions at all levels. So a little bit more about mining. Well, it's a hugely wealthy industry, incredibly profitable. And in fact, last year, Australia's largest 3 miners reported over 65 billion in profits. Let me put that in context for you. Mining is the single largest contributor to the country's GDP at over 10%. Yet just because women are working in this hugely profitable industry doesn't mean that they're still not exposed to the gender pay gap. They are, heavily. The gender pay gap in mining in Australia stands at 17%. And that's not all. It's getting worse. It's actually increased 2%. So that's a little bit about what mining looks like broadly. But what did mining look like for me? Well, when I started in the mining industry 7 years ago, I was the only female mine geologist on my site. And my leadership pathway from senior geologist all the way to CEO were men. It really did make it hard for me to envisage what a career there would look like. Would I be able to survive? Would I be able to thrive? I have 2 geology degrees, but that didn't stop my male colleagues from asking me if my first employer had hired me as a receptionist. It was a joke though, so no need for me to be upset. Yeah. Not only that, I'd be sitting there in the office on my mine site, and the door would open up and some fellow mining personnel would walk through, and they would walk past my male engineering colleagues and they would walk past my male geologist colleagues until they got to my desk. And at my desk, they would start to ask me, oh, could you maybe book my flight out of sight? Could you maybe order me some new work uniforms? I wasn't the admin person. I was a geologist. Now, if you're sitting there and thinking, this is all pretty minor and it's not that harmful, I get it. In the grand scheme of things, this probably doesn't seem particularly problematic. But this isn't everything that happened to me in my workplace. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Sexual harassment and sexual assault are not uncommon in this industry. And it happened to me too. So this all paints a pretty bleak picture. So what are we going to do to turn this around? Gender equality has been stagnating in this industry and we need to do something about it. Well, in my experience, if we get women in leadership roles, we have a chance of turning this around. And why do I even care? Well, I'm hugely passionate about this industry. I love mining and I'm committed to the sector. Mining is a huge employer. It employs millions globally and the opportunities are huge. But don't we all deserve to have equality in those opportunities? I think we need to move to a future where everyone has access to those opportunities and can have a future in the industry, regardless of gender. So how do we get to this point? Well, we know now that gender equality and women in leadership isn't just an aspiration, it's actually a basic requirement for society. And it's so powerful when we see inclusive teams at work, particularly inclusive teams that work in mining. We see increased productivity. BHP were able to show that diverse teams were 11% more productive. Think of how much more iron ore that's getting shipped every year. We see increased safety. Once again, BHP showed that diverse teams were 67% safer. Does that mean 2/3 of injuries could be prevented just by having diverse teams? Look, I'm not sure, but isn't it a really encouraging thought? And we have a better and more inclusive culture. That means happier individuals. It means more empathetic and caring teams. So how do we get to this point? We know we have to get to this point where we have more women in leadership positions so we can drive this. Well, I became one of the first female operations supervisors for geoscience at BHP. And no, I don't think I changed the world, but I do think I was able to have a positive impact on my peers and my teams. So what kind of inclusive practices did I do? Well, when I had the opportunity to hire new personnel, I made sure to interview a diverse range of candidates. In fact, I demanded from recruitment that they give me diverse candidates. I needed to hire the best person for the job and for the team, and I couldn't do that by looking at heaps of people that looked the same. I mentored and I coached the women in my team to encourage them to achieve their career goals. Now, this diverse team I was able to build led to a team that was able to think smarter. We were able to work safer. We were able to build technical developments that meant we didn't have to rely on hard manual labour. There was a smarter and a safer way. We just needed diverse perspectives to figure out what those ways were. It really goes to show the positive impact by doing something so simple as putting one woman in an operations supervisor role can have. Within a year of me starting, there were more female operations supervisors, a few of which I had a direct impact on. I was able to support them and encourage them to achieve their career aspirations for leadership. I believe that women in leadership in mining leads to more diverse teams, which leads to happier, safer, more productive workforces. I mean, isn't that what we all want? That's all what we're seeking for in our workplaces. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about the landscape of gender equality and women in leadership in mining. But I want to make it some common ground for all of us. What does it look like in all the industries we work in? Do we have access to female CEOs there? Sure, mining exaggerates these trends, but it's pretty common across all our industries. Think about the companies you work in, the industries you work for. Do you have a female CEO? So recently in Australia, of the top 200 companies, they had more CEOs and chairpersons named John than they did women. Or David. Or Peter. I mean, do I have to think about a name change in my development plan if I want to get to the top? Straight, white, able-bodied men, aged 40 to 69 years, represented the bulk of Australian leadership, but only 8% of the population. Does having these characteristics inherently make you a better leader? I just don't think so. Okay, and so in mining, clearly we're going to see more male leaders at the top because that's just the way the industry's made up at the moment. It's a male-dominated industry. But even in those female-dominated industries, such as healthcare, education, we still see a majority male leadership. In fact, there doesn't exist a single industry globally where women are overrepresented in the C-suite space. Isn't that bizarre? Okay, so we're not seeing women at the CEO level or in top leadership positions, but are they at least represented in the boardroom? No, not really. Despite the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, pushing for minimum female representation on European boards for over a decade, the proposal continues to be blocked. Opponents say that change is going to happen naturally, organically. We just got to wait for it. Well, you know what? It hasn't happened. And at 35% female representation, we still don't have equality. And how can we possibly expect diverse CEOs to be hired if we don't even have diverse boards? So what's going on here? How can this possibly be? Why are we still in this space? Well, an often quoted issue I've heard is that there just aren't enough qualified and appropriate women to fill these jobs. Well, I reject this. I reject it entirely, and I think you should too. Many women have spent their whole careers being overlooked for their accomplishments, not recognised for their efforts, but imagine if they were. I assure you, women are here and they're ready to do the work. And why does this even matter if we don't have women in the top leadership space? Well, I think limiting the executive talent pool to 50% of the population does a huge disservice. It does a disservice to those companies, to the shareholders of the companies, to society and the general population of the country. It means we have less empathetic leaders. It means we have leaders who have less of a focus on social responsibility and sustainability and less development pathways for women. So, I think I've covered why we need women in leadership. But if you're sitting there and you're still not convinced and you're like, sure, it sounds nice, but it's just a nice to have, isn't it? got something really interesting for you to consider. What if I were to tell you that women in leadership isn't just about doing what's right? It also makes good financial sense. As employees of companies and investors of companies, and potentially even we've got some board members here of companies, you're invested in those companies and want to see them do well. So I'm here to tell you that you can see an increase of your company's market value of 5% by doing one simple thing. And no, it's not looking at growth strategies. Forget about mergers and acquisitions. No, we're not reevaluating our management practices either. Now, this isn't going to seem particularly novel, but it's an opportunity that so few companies have exploited. So I think we're ready to hear what it is. Appoint a female CEO. It's really that simple. Now, let's say you already have a female CEO. Well, terrific and congratulations. You're one of only 6% of companies who do. So you're probably already experiencing healthy profitability and great market value. But let's say you really wanted to see this company you care about get better. What would you want them to do? Well, you'd want them to see an increase of your female top-tier management of 10%, and you'd expect to see your market value increase by 6.6%. Now, this all sounds a little bit too good to be true. Can it really be that simple? But this research comes from the Australian Workplace Gender and Equality Agency, and they've been collecting data from all companies in the country for over a decade. This dataset is now a world-leading dataset, and one so robust and so statistically significant, we can see trends like this. And sure, I acknowledge this is specifically relating to Australia. But don't you think there's some really powerful lessons for all countries globally? So to think, we know that women in leadership is just the right thing to do. But if you still weren't convinced, now you know. There's strong evidence that said it's not actually just about doing what's right. It also makes good financial sense. So the challenge to you all today, are you going to do what's right by your shareholders and appoint a female CEO? Let's not stop there though. Let's get more women taking on roles in male-dominated industries, and let's get more women attaining C-suite positions. Diverse workforces lead to safer, more productive, happier teams, and diverse firms lead to increased market value and increased shareholder return. The future looks bright to me, and I really hope I've convinced you too. Thank you.